With great power comes great responsibility.
Compromise where you can. Where you can't, don't. Even if everyone is telling you that something wrong is something right. Even if the whole world is telling you to move. It is your duty to plant yourself like a tree, look them in the eye and say no. You move.
Never step onto the battlefield of ideas unprepared. Before you enter the fray, you need a plan. And there's no better place to get one than right here on Tactics with host Caleb Colquitt. The Situation Room goes live now on News Radio 1440.
And welcome in, everybody. Thank you so much for being with us here on Tactics, where speech isn't violence and disagreement isn't hate. So thank you so much for being with us today. We appreciate you whether you're joining us from Facebook, from YouTube, if you're watching us on Twitter, Twitch, Periscope, however you're choosing to view us this afternoon. We certainly do appreciate you choosing to make us a part of your busy schedule. And there's a lot of news that was going on. We were off for Labor Day, which means that the news stories have just stacked and piled up. And some of that is probably by design. Some of it's probably just happenstance. But we are certainly glad to be back with you, and we are going to dive headfirst into it. Not going to be a whole lot of national news today because we just have so much state-level news to go through, and we'll try to do that with as much detail as is necessary. The first big thing is the Mobile Bridge, which has been the topic of much conversation in the state over the past few weeks. Well, I'm happy to announce that ding dong, the bridge is dead. So this monstrosity that was going to cost $2.1 billion to the Alabama taxpayer is now no longer a thing. Now, we're not 100% sure exactly what the future looks like, and I'm going to give you some of my predictions here in a second about what this is going to mean going forward. But the project that exists now, the Bayway Bridge, has officially been canceled. And that has happened in large part because of the outcry of the taxpayers and voters of the great state of Alabama, making it very clear that they didn't want to pay for this incredibly expensive, overpriced bridge, especially when you consider that they were not only going to have to pay when they pay their taxes, they were also going to have to pay on top of that, on top of their income taxes, on top of their sales taxes, on top of their property taxes. They were also going to have to pay a toll that would be up to $6 one way. So yeah, the people of Alabama very clearly communicated this is not something that we are in favor of. It got so much backlash that the politicians finally just had to scrap the entire thing. Now, this comes 2 days, ironically, after the tax increase on our gasoline. So you may have noticed that September 1st, that's when the gas tax, that's when it came into effect. So you may have noticed if you're going around buying gas the past couple of days that, hey, it's a little more expensive than it was going into the weekend. Well, there's a good reason for that. The gas tax did kick in. It's going to be 6 cents for the first year. And what's really crazy about this gas tax, and we talked about it a lot, I know, is that it's not only 6 cents for the beginning year, but it is going to increase by 2 cents the next year, 2 cents the year after that, and then after those first 3 years, in perpetuity, the gas tax increases 2 cents from then on, as long as inflation keeps up with it, which right now there's no sign to suggest that it is not going to. So this is a tax that just continues to rise without the government having to act upon it. This is a general rule, especially if you're kind of new to the realm of politics, if you're just now starting to get really interested, if you're just now starting to study it, especially Alabama politics. I mean, it's true everywhere, but it's especially true in the state. Always, 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 always be skeptical of any policy or law that runs on autopilot. I'm not saying that every single one is a trap, but usually they are. Any bill that sets way out into the future its goals and doesn't do things for a long time, or does them but does them gradually and does it gradually over the course, especially when you're looking at one that isn't going to hit the zenith of its effect until, you know, about a term, about a 4-year period. Normally, if that's the case, the reason for that is because the politicians are striving to ensure that they are not held politically responsible for their actions. That happens a lot because if there's a bill that's kind of on the fence, if you say, well, you know, this particular bill, it doesn't actually take effect until after you're gone or after the election or whatever it may be, then they can sort of bring a few more senators or representatives or whoever the elected officials are on board because they know that they're not going to have to pay a political price for it. They want the policy, but they know that it's unpopular. They know that the people are not going to approve of it. Look, sometimes elected officials have to be the adults in the room. That's why we have a representative republic and not a direct democracy. There's a reason for that. I understand that. And I understand that sometimes politicians have to make difficult decisions that are not always popular. But here's the thing. I don't trust a politician that because he knows his ideas are popular are going to hide from it. If you believe that it's the right thing to do, then go out and make your case to the American people, or in this case, the people of the state of Alabama. Go out and make that case. Fight for it. Try to convince others that your idea is right. And at the end of the day, if you lose, at least you were honest about it. At least you explained your position. At least you went to the front lines and said, no, it is a good idea, and here is why. I don't trust people that support policies that are going to take effect largely after they're already gone. Those people are cowards. They don't want to justify their position to the people. They just want to be able to vote however they want and not face any repercussions for it. And this gas tax is a shining example of that. And by the way, the bridge largely was as well. That by the time people were actually driving across this thing and paying $6 a day to cross it, even after paying an exorbitant amount on their taxes for it, most of those politicians were either going to be out of office or holding a different office somewhere else where they wouldn't be held nearly as accountable. That's the normal order of politics everywhere, but it seems to be especially true in the state of Alabama. I don't know, maybe that's just because I'm closer to it, maybe it's because I've been covering it longer, but it feels like in this state that's especially true. But that's just a general rule. Always be suspicious of it. But I tell you what, who was absolutely thrilled to death about this bridge being scrapped, that the whole project wound up going down in flames, and that was our state auditor, Jim Ziegler, which, by the way, I really like Jim Ziegler, and I think that the guy's phenomenal at what he does. He's one of my favorite politicians in the state as one of our constitutional officers. But even if it weren't Jim Ziegler, anytime your state auditor comes out and says, yeah, we probably shouldn't support this project, I'm not saying that automatically makes him right. I'm saying that holds a little more weight with me because your job is literally to protect the taxpayer and their investments. It's your job to do the bookkeeping and making sure that everything's on the up and up when it comes to the state's books. And so when the state auditor comes out and says, yeah, this thing's going to be a nightmare, and because of that, I'm going to have to vote against it. Not saying that for sure, no matter what the state auditor says, that's what we ought to go with. I'm just saying, if the issue is financing, that ought to carry at least a little more weight, and especially true with somebody like Jim Ziegler that has a phenomenal fiscal conservative record. So this was Ziegler's statement on the deal. We use the Facebook group as a communication tool and an organizing tool for the citizens movement. For those of you who don't know, Jim Ziegler actually put together a Facebook page that specifically was for people to voice their displeasure with this bridge. And he's done something similar like this before, but this is probably the most successful one that he's ever done. And he continues on. And man, did it catch fire. I've never been involved in anything like it. The people were against this. Only certain Montgomery politicians were for it. Also true. And we beat them. By now, we've beat and have had almost 55,000 members Almost every politician is against it now, he added. But when we first started, people would tell me, you're wasting your time, this is a done deal, they're going to ram it down our throats just like they did the gas tax increase, and fortunately, I didn't listen to that. Props to Jim Ziegler. Now, one thing I will say that Ziegler kind of brings up, and he doesn't right out and out say it, I don't know if he's implying it or not, but this was my takeaway from it, where he talks about, well, they're going to shove it down our throats just like they did the gas tax. That is accurate. They did try and use similar tactics to the way that they used to force the gas tax down everybody's throat. I think the reason that it didn't work is because if you use the same trick over and over again, people start to catch on. And people were mad about the gas tax, and rightfully so. I've laid out the case for why it's a horrible idea many, many times. You can go look at the past episodes if you want a better example, or sorry, you want a more elaborate explanation of why that is. But what Jim Ziegler is talking about here is, I think the reason that this did catch fire, his Facebook group and in general, is because the politicians already sensed, they already knew that they were skating on very, very thin ice because of the gas tax. And if they did this, another giant tax and spend project, then it would be a lot harder for them to get reelected. And I'm pretty upset with my own representative right now, Clyde Chambliss, in voting in favor of the gas tax. I'm pretty miffed at him myself. And so I think that they've sort of sensed that there's blood in the water, and that the people of Alabama are ready to throw some bums out of office, and they did not want this to be the straw that broke the camel's back. Now, whether or not that was politically, I know whether I think it was the correct move or not, but whether or not politically that was a calculation that they made correctly, I don't know. I suppose we'll find out. I'm hoping that the gas tax by itself was enough to convince people not to re-elect a lot of these guys. And I know that I'm going to have to seriously reconsider if there's a decent primary candidate for Clyde Chambliss voting for whoever his opponent is. And I hate to say that because I've always really liked Senator Chambliss. My other representative, Wildis Mukes, he voted against it, and props to him for that. But I will say to Jim Ziegler, this does display the power of social media. It really is a pretty good indication of how social media, though not official, not really what you would consider the traditional press, and sort of the pressure that the press puts on politicians. Try saying that 5 times fast. The pressure that the press puts on politicians. But anyway, when it comes to social media, this was a very real example where politicians could look and go, we're not a very big state, and there's 55,000 people on this one Facebook group saying, no, we don't want the bridge. Maybe we should reconsider our stance on that. Not scientific polling, not, but people that are willing to actually do that. The fact that there were people that were getting behind this, I do think made a difference. I think Jim Ziegler is actually correct on that. And I do think that it displays one other truth about Alabama and Alabamians in general. Granted, the people of Alabama are a little slow to act. And they kind of have short memories and short attention spans. And by the way, I'm not dissing Alabama, my home state. I think that voters in most states are like that. I don't think that that's really something that is specific to the state of Alabama. I'm sort of speaking in generalities here. All those things are true. Short memory, short attention span, not real quick to jump on one side of the issue or the other. But that's not necessarily true when it comes to taxes, especially when you're talking about double taxation. When you're talking about getting one bite at the apple and then taking another bite of the same guy's apple when he comes by a little later to use the service that you claimed you needed the first bite for. And I think that politicians in Alabama would be very wise to remember that that is where a lot of the people of Alabama draw that line. That they'll tolerate some taxes, and even though they don't like it, they'll sometimes tolerate or even vote for, which has happened in our state history before, vote for a tax increase. They are not going to do it when you're taxing them and then taxing them again for the exact same thing later. That seems to be the line that a vast majority of Alabama's voters do not want to cross, and they actually will get politically active before doing so. So maybe that's a lesson for the future. Here's another statement by Ziegler, by the way. The more we learned about this plan, the worse it got. That's absolutely true. The further in you dug, the more you realized a lot of that cost was attributed to, for example, an Obama-era executive order stating that all bridges had to be compliant for climate change for the next 100 years. We found out that there were people getting some sweetheart deals, that their back was getting scratched by some of their political buddies. I mean, it was like an onion. The deeper you dug into it, the more layers you peeled back, the more it stunk. So Jim Ziegler is 100% right on that. But then he continues on. The people rose up, and I've never seen anything like it since the civil rights movement of the 1960s. I wasn't involved in that, but I was a young student watching it. I don't think this was politically smart. Now, I get what Jim Ziegler is saying. I do. I totally understand. What he is saying is, in the same way that people were very excited about and willing to rise up and make some political noise in the civil rights movement, they were likewise willing to make some noise and politically rise up when it came to this issue. That's what Ziegler is actually saying. That's the denotation. I'm afraid that the connotation is going to be somewhat differently perceived by others. Now, to my knowledge, nobody has come out and pointed this out, so hopefully people aren't going to be upset at Jim Ziegler for saying this, but when comparing anything to the civil rights movement, you always run the risk of somebody who just doesn't like what you're saying politically coming out and attacking you for it. Now, it seems as though both Democrats and Republicans on both sides of the aisle in the state of Alabama really didn't like the bridge, and so Jim Ziegler's bacon may have been brought out of the fire specifically because of that, but obviously it's not the same as the civil rights movement. Not being charged a $6 tax on a toll bridge is not the same as having police dogs and fire hoses turned on you. Nobody in their right mind thinks that. Jim Ziegler doesn't think that. I'm always hesitant to speak for somebody else, but I'm pretty sure if you ask him, Jim Ziegler would say exactly the same thing. It's unwise to use any kind of analogy to the civil rights movement, because if it's not exactly 100% the way that it's not a one-to-one comparison, then people will say, oh, well, that's racist. He's saying that getting a bridge and having to pay for it is just as bad as not being allowed to eat at the same table as a white person. That's not what Jim Ziegler is saying. I hope he's not going to get any backlash like that. I'm just trying to hit it off at the pass in case that takes place. So it was a politically unwise comparison, and Lord knows that Jim Ziegler has done a few of those in his political history. We all remember the Joseph and Mary thing when the Roy Moore issue came out, that he became somewhat infamous for making that comparison, which again was a dumb comparison. But what he's actually saying is people got really active and really loud about it, and that's the reason that there was a political change. Both of those statements could be said of the bridge thing and the civil rights movement. Now, the civil rights movement, obviously far more important, but he's saying that they are similar, at least in that one respect. And so try not to read too much into that. So the real question is, what now? Now that this has taken place, now that we have this bridge project scrapped, what happens? Because it's not as though people disagreed with the idea of having a bridge in the first place. I wouldn't say that Mobile desperately needs the bridge, but it'd certainly be nice to have, and constructing this thing was going to be a good idea. I didn't oppose the bridge on the merit of having a new bridge. I opposed it on the fact that it was very clear from very early on that the price tag was going to be far too much, and nobody had a good plan of how to pay for it. That's the reason that I and a lot of other conservatives oppose the bridge, not because we're anti-bridge, or we think that the government shouldn't be in charge of building a bridge there. So then the question becomes, well, how do we fix this issue then? I think what's probably going to happen is because this project has been scrapped, they go back to the drawing board, start over, and try to design a bridge that isn't nearly as expensive. I don't know how that'll work out. I don't know exactly what that's going to look like, what the solution is going to look like. But I do know that one thing that would help it tremendously is to straight up ignore the executive orders, which they should do, by the way. This is a state construction project. I see no reason that they should worry about being compliant with the executive order of a past president. And if anything, Kay Ivey needs to be on the phone trying to talk to President Trump saying, hey, you really need to undo this ridiculous ordinance that's probably hurt us and a bunch of other states along the way in being compliant to climate change standards for the next 100 years. But nonetheless, that's one thing that will make a big change. And I think that this bridge probably gets built. Probably gets built a year, maybe two later than we thought it was going to be. And it's going to be a lot cheaper and a lot more efficient. This thing isn't going to be done the way that it was beforehand. Now, does that mean that there's going to be no waste at all? No, I'm not saying that. It's government. There's probably going to be a decent amount of waste at some point, but it's going to be a lot less, I think, than the first one because they realize, hey, people actually are paying attention to this. We can't just roll out whatever ridiculous price tag we want and think people are going to be okay with it. That does change the priorities here, and I think that the politicians that write the next proposal are going to be far more diligent about making this bridge palatable to the people of Mobile and the people of the state of Alabama. One thing that I would really like to see, I don't think it's going to happen, but I would like to see this become much more of a local issue. I'm not saying the state can't help out at all. It is, after all, on a major roadway in the state. I-10 is an important part of the interstate system. I get that. But it should be mostly locally led because they're the ones that are there every day. They're the ones that are going to be using it more often than not. I think that the state needs to take much more of a backseat than it did in the first draft when it comes to figuring out what's going to work best for the people of Mobile. And because of that, I think that the people in Mobile ought to be the ones footing the majority, not all, but the majority of the bill. When issues tend to stay localized as much as possible, they tend to be better, more efficient, and better suit the needs of their community. I think that the big takeaway from this, though, is if you want to get things done, if that's the goal, if you really do want to change the political landscape, you need to do one thing. Methods change. You may use social media or TV or print press, whatever. But you need to do one thing, and that is make the politicians uncomfortable. Make it to where they know, these guys are not real happy with me, and they may primary me if I don't do what they want me to do. When that happens, political change does come. Next up, we do have some more local news, and I am going to get to the Governor Kay Ivey and the video of her doing blackface. But before I depress you with that story, I wanted to give you one to kind of lift you up a little bit. And this is a really cool story. Publix, yes, the grocery store Publix. They're not a sponsor. I'm just doing this because I think it's a good story. Publix is donating $500,000 to Alabama food banks. So within the state of Alabama, $500,000 going directly to food banks to help the charities in those local areas, which I think is phenomenal. Good on you, Publix. We appreciate what you're doing. We appreciate you helping these guys out. And the Montgomery area food bank specifically, one that's not really far from where I'm sitting right now, is going to be receiving $100,000 from Publix to help them feed the hungry in the city. So props to Publix for doing this. I mean, Publix is a great company. I had a roommate that actually worked there while I was in college, and he always loved it. They treat their employees well. They treat their customers well, and this is what I love about it. And I'm not going to do like a Publix versus Walmart thing and cue the gladiator music or anything like that. They both have their own merits, and people that shop there are looking for different things when they shop there. But Walmart is a titan when it comes to corporate America, one of the wealthiest companies in the country. And the way that Publix hedged its way into the marketplace to where they were competitive with them was to serve a different community. Because the people going to Walmart and the people that are going to Publix are not looking for the same thing. I'm not saying that there's a difference in classes or anything, although sometimes that kind of manifests itself when it comes to income. But the people that shop at Publix, they want a customer-friendly environment. They have higher standards for what they're doing shopping when they go there, and that is somewhat reflected in the price. But they are very good to their employees, and they also expect an awful lot out of their employees, more than Walmart expects out of theirs. And so because of that, you are purchasing a part of the product that you're buying is a little more expensive, because what you're really buying is the increased customer service, the increased attention to detail, cleanliness, that kind of thing. And so because of that, Publix was able to hedge its way into the market and become very popular. I still shop at both locations. When I need something that I know that I need to get it cheap, I go to Walmart. If I'm buying something and I just want to zip in and out and I know I don't have a lot of time, I ain't going to Walmart because it's going to take 30 minutes. I go to Publix. And so Publix understood that there was a marketplace, that there was an opening for them, and there would be people that would want to reward them with their money, their hard-earned dollars. And so what I really like about this is, first, I just love stories of good people helping other people. I mean, that's always good. That's always a positive. That's always going to perk my ears up. I know you may not believe that because so many of my stories happen to be doom and gloom, but that's really not the kind of thing that I want to report about every day. It's just the things that I think are important to report about every day. But this really is a testament to the wonders of a free market. And I'm not trying to make a political statement here, but I mean, the proof is in the pudding. And at a certain point, you do have to say, hey, check out the scoreboard. When it comes to the way that Publix is able to do things like this, how did they reach it? They found a market. They marketed a product to a customer base that they knew was going to appreciate it. They marketed increased customer service, increased cleanliness, all of those things that the people that shop at Publix like. And because they served their fellow man by providing a product that other people liked, they made a lot of money. And they gave a portion of that money that they made back to charities. I mean, if that's not a testament to how great the free market system is, and the free market system, when functioning correctly and the way it is intended, has a lot of stuff like this, where a lot of private people and private businesses use the advantages of capitalism to turn around and serve other people in another way after they've already served them by presenting them with the product that they wanted, then also going back and using that profit to serve their fellow man. This is a great example of it, and kudos to Publix for pulling this one off. All right, so I do have a couple of other stories to get to. This one is going to take quite some time, so I tell you what we'll do. We'll take a break, and we'll be back, and we'll talk about Governor Ivey and her whole situation with the Blackface scandal that has surfaced over the weekend. So we will be back in just a moment with all of that.
Hey, where you going? Champ? Slugger? Hey, cowboy. Where you going? Where you going?
I'm going out!
All right, here we are. So you guys remember last year, one of the things I talked about in a segment called Straw Wars is how the liberals, despite no scientific evidence or backing whatsoever, believe that somehow they are saving the sea life by banning plastic straws. In response to this, Mellow Mushroom has started giving out paper straws as opposed to plastic straws. So what we're going to do is we're going to see how effective the paper straws are with the most difficult drink to drink, a milkshake. Let's see how this stands up. All right, so First of all, I got about 2 sips out of that, and the paper stuck to my lips. This thing does not work too well. Boy, it'd take you 2 hours to drink this with this.
Well, see, I'm using plastic.
That's John from Millbrook, by the way. He's
And I
the one
don't care.
driving.
I think they use plastic because that's the best thing to use.
This thing sucks. Well, actually, it doesn't suck. If it sucked, I'd be fine with it, but it doesn't. This milkshake will melt before I finish this. All right. Experiment over. It's biodegradable. All right. We're going to fix this now. There we go. Good old petroleum-based plastic straws. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. Oh, that's so much better.
I got a question about this.
Oh yeah?
With the paper, aren't they concerned about the trees, having to cut down the trees to make the straws too? Is that not a...
Well, that's one of the points that I made. It doesn't matter what you make the straw out of. You're expending some kind of resource.
Well, yeah, because we all live here.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like, it doesn't matter what you make any product out of. You're expending some kind of resource. Mm-hmm. And that's true of straws or anything else. Well, I tell you this. Just based on this little experiment, I know that I saw that Disney is planning to go completely paper straw by 2020 on all their cruise lines and all of their amusement parks. I contend that Disney World is not the happiest place on earth if I can't drink a Dead Blame milkshake while I'm there.
But I will, to their defense, say one thing.
Oh?
You can take a pocket knife in. So help me.
That's something.
Yeah.
Anyway, alright, so even though this went about the way I expected it to, paper straw experiment failed miserably. I imagine if I had left it in there much longer, it would have dissolved. I had a buddy the other day that went to a place that used paper straws. He said he had to order 6 different straws throughout the course of his meal because they kept dissolving on him. Which I'm sitting there thinking, you can't tell me that using 1 plastic straw is worse for the environment than 6 paper straws. I mean, that's just common sense. Anyway, alright, thanks guys. I'm going to enjoy the rest of my milkshake.
And welcome back, all. Thanks so much for being with us here on Tactics. And got a lot to talk about, but I know that everybody's been waiting for this one. The governor has this whole fiasco where a tape was discovered of her from 1967 at Auburn University. Of course, Kay Ivey is an Auburn girl, so we know that she was actually in college at the time. Apparently, they unearthed a video of her involved in a skit from 1967. In 1967, 52 years ago, where she was wearing blackface in a skit that she did. So a couple of things that I sort of want to give as precursors before getting into some of the details. First of all, I know that it's dumb that I even have to say this, that it should be so common sense that nobody watching this would assume that I'm saying anything differently. But of course, belittling people because of their race is wrong, and blackface usually does that. I wouldn't say always. I've seen actually like Frank Caliendo, you know, the guy who does impersonations. I've seen him, he kind of darkened his skin a little bit to do, I think it was a Charles Barkley impersonation, which, by the way, that bit is hilarious. And of course, he is making fun of Barkley, but not because he's black, because the guy's an impressionist. So there are a handful of scenarios where it can be done tastefully and respectfully that I can think of. But anytime you're making fun of somebody because of their race, that's obviously beyond the pale. If you're belittling them specifically because they're a different race, that's obviously wrong. And because blackface almost always does that, as a general rule, it's smart to just stay away from it, to never even get close to that line. If there's a cliff, you don't get right up to the edge of the cliff and then back off. You just say, no, I ain't going up on the cliff. And so, just as a general rule, I think that for anybody within the sound of my voice, never wear blackface for any reason. that will be the best way to keep yourself out of trouble, and it's also the best way to keep somebody from even unintentionally misinterpreting what you're doing and being offended by it. So that's just the best way to handle it right out of the gate. So the second thing about this, and this is just a general rule of life, this isn't even just pertaining to this situation that we're talking about. I care primarily about who a person is now. And the reason that I do that, and I don't care as much about who they used to be, at least not unless it's relative to who they are now, is because that's exactly what God does. I mean, you look through, especially the book of Romans in chapter 5, God is a God of who are you now and what are you doing now? And that makes sense because God, as an eternal spirit, is primarily focused on the present because it is the only somewhat eternal moment that we have as human beings. It's the closest thing to eternity we have on this side of eternity, what we're doing right now, right this second. God doesn't give people a pass because he knows they'll be better in the future, nor does he punish them or hold it to their account if they have been washed by the blood of Jesus and forgiven of their sins. And because God is primarily focused on what a person is doing right then and the decisions that they are making in the moment, that's what I try to do. I don't excuse actions, bad actions that people have done, including myself in the past, but also try not to dwell on them or to act as though that defines who you are right now. And that's just a general rule for life that I think is wise. And in this particular case, the reason that I say that when it comes to Governor Ivey, I don't believe that she is the person that she was back then, or I don't even know who she was back then. I think that this is a single moment in time in the life of a young Governor Kay Ivey in her 20s. And so I'm not sure if this is indicative of the person she was back then or exactly who she was, but obviously she has at least changed now because she said, well, of course I wouldn't do it now. And of course that would be wise. But the reason that I know that Governor Ivey is not a racist today is because I actually know and am friends with a person that is on her staff. I know that that would be hard to believe watching my show because you've not actually seen Governor Ivey make an appearance on the show. Granted, my connection isn't very high, but this is a person that has worked with Kay Ivey for a number of years and worked in a pretty close proximity. And by the way, the girl that I'm talking about, we were friends in high school. That's how I knew her. I knew her before either one of us were into politics. She was actually an FFA member at one of our rival schools. And really, smart, intelligent girl, somebody that I always admired. In fact, I actually considered at one point asking her out. I didn't because at the time I was a senior and she was an 8th grader. And granted, 5 years apart isn't much when you're in your 20s and 30s, but it's a really big deal when the person is still in middle school and you're in high school. And so I decided not to. But the point is, this is somebody that I think a lot of, somebody that I really respect, even to the point that I was willing to consider dating them at one point. But a really, really nice person. And she's somebody that works with the governor on a very regular basis and just would not do that, has too much respect for herself to do that if Governor Ivey were indeed a racist. And I've never heard anything out of her about her dealings with Governor Ivey to suggest that she considers her a lesser staffer. I mean, not only did she hire her, but she continued to keep her on for, a number of years afterward and still works with her. And so I've gotten no indication that Governor Ivey is anything other than a person that looks at people of different races as equals. I have no reason to believe that she is anything else, at least today. Maybe based on this blackface thing, Governor Ivey of the past wasn't that way, but it seems to me through every indication that I have that she is that way now. She does believe that people are on the same playing field. Now, because of this incident, there are people understandably upset. but I think that they're taking it too far. And I'm going to read some examples of that right here, because here's the thing. They're calling for her resignation. I would actually really like Governor Ivey to resign. I would. Anybody that has watched this show for any number of time, especially if you're any amount of time, especially if you remember the gas tax debacle, especially if you remember the whole thing with the bill that basically deregulated and completely let lobbyists run wild as long as they were economic developers. I mean, Governor Ivey has made some incredibly questionable political choices. She was by far my least favorite out of all of the Republicans in the primary. I did wind up voting for her because Governor Ivey's kind of a mixed bag. On her best day, she's a mixed bag. On her worst days, I think of her as a very left-leaning Republican, sometimes even venturing into left of center. I mean, she does love her some taxes and spending. But I say all that not to kick her while she's down, but to explain, frankly, I'd love for Governor Ivey to resign. I would love to see Governor Will Answorth take the reins. Will Answorth isn't perfect either, but he's considerably more conservative than Governor Ivey. And by the way, so were all three of her political opponents when it came to the primaries. Kay Ivey was my last choice in the Republican primary. I am no huge Kay Ivey supporter, and I'd love to see her step down and see Will Answorth take the reins. That would be a dream come true for me. However, I can't get behind this idea of resignation for this specifically because I don't think that this is a good reason for her to resign. She wants to resign of her own accord. I'm all for it. But Governor Ivey should not resign because of this. So here are some of the people that are calling for her resignation. The Alabama NAACP president, Bernard Simelton, said, quote, "It may have been 52 years ago when the skit happened, but it apparently still shapes who she is today. She refused to meet with the NAACP 2 years ago to discuss race relations in Alabama. She has not taken steps to expand Medicaid in Alabama. She gladly signed bills to protect one of the most racist American symbols, the Confederate flag and monuments." So basically what he's saying is, well, Kay Ivey disagrees with me on some political issues, therefore she's a racist. That's insane. When it comes to the Medicaid expansion, what the crap does that have to do with race? Nothing. He's trying to wire work and do some mental gymnastics to try to come up with ways that Governor Ivey has proven herself to be a racist. She canceled a meeting on you 2 years ago. The governor cancels meetings with people all the freaking time. Or doesn't meet with somebody. That happens a lot. A lot of people want to meet with the governor. You're going to have to do better than that. And when it comes to the last thing about the Confederate flags and monuments, there are a lot of people that are concerned about history that have absolutely no racism whatsoever in their heart that wanted to protect the Confederate flags and monuments, which, by the way, is a bill that I disagreed with. But I didn't think that everyone that disagreed with me politically was a horrible racist bigot. I don't think that way. This guy apparently does. That if you disagree with him on some policy issues, well, it's because you're secretly a racist. Can't possibly be against the Medicaid expansion because, it would cost the government a lot of money. That it would effectively bankrupt the state. That's not the reason you're opposing it. You're opposing it because you hate black people. That's the best you can do, really? Yeah, you're going to have to do a lot better than that. This guy's basically coming out and just admitting the reason that he's saying that Governor Ivey is a racist is not because of her policy, not because she's worn blackface, but because, well, she and I don't see eye to eye on some policies politically, therefore racist. Representative John Rogers. Now, you may remember John Rogers, the piece of human garbage that referred to babies, well, we're going to kill them one way or the other. We either have to kill them now or we need to kill them in the electric chair later. We're going to have to kill them either way, so let's have abortion. I mean, this senile old coot, even the Democrats don't take him seriously anymore. But here's John Rogers, representative in the state of Alabama. "It is not acceptable at any time or place. Do us a favor and step down. If she were really sorry, she would have apologized before now. she's sorry she got caught. Look, first of all, Governor Ivey claims that she doesn't remember it, which I can't say for sure. I don't know. I can't read her mind. But I tend to believe her, first of all, because it was a freaking half century ago. I mean, when this took place in 1967, color TVs were still a luxury, and nobody had even heard of the internet. It's not exactly like this is a recent event. And so the fact that Governor Ivey doesn't remember this, do you remember everything that you did in college? I don't, and I'm 30. There are plenty of things that I probably did with, and I'm not saying bad things, just events in general, that I probably took place in my fraternity, in my FFA chapter at Auburn, that I don't remember now. And I'm only, I graduated in 2013, so I'm only about 6 years removed from that. And there's still things that I don't remember. This happened 52 years ago. And let's be honest, Governor Ivey's not the sharpest knife in the drawer. I didn't buy into the narrative that she was losing her mind and she had late stage dementia or anything like that, because there were some people that didn't like Governor Ivey that were pushing that narrative. I don't think that her mind is completely gone or anything, but I'm just saying, she's a little bit older. And so it wouldn't surprise me that she actually doesn't remember this going on, not only because of how long ago it was, but because, she's a little bit of an older lady. She's a little advanced in years. And older people have some trouble remembering some things, which is understandable. So that's the first thing. The second, about she's not apologized before now. Do you just randomly say that you're sorry for things that you did in the past that were probably a bad idea? Because I don't know of anyone that does that just all of a sudden wakes up one morning and says, oh, you know what? I did a really stupid thing 50 years ago. I'm really sorry about it. That's just not a commonplace thing. And another thing, John Rogers, maybe the reason, maybe she didn't forget it. Maybe she actually did remember it, and you're actually correct on that point. Let's just assume that's true. Maybe the reason that she was scared to apologize for it and hope that nobody ever discovered it is because people would react exactly the way that you're reacting right now. No benefit of the doubt, not willing to listen, just, nope, she should resign. Don't even want to hear her. And if she says she's sorry, it's only because she's sorry that she got caught. No assumption of innocence, nothing. Just, nope, we need to kick her out. That attitude that John Rogers has is probably exactly the reason that Governor Ivey did not want to say anything about it if she did happen to remember it. You see, it's when people react like this, where they essentially form a mob with their torches and pitchforks and go after somebody and want to ruin their life for a mistake that they made half a century ago. It's that mentality and that sort of social justice warrior lynch mob, for lack of a better way to say it. It's exactly that kind of reaction is the reason that people don't want to talk about this stuff. I'm not saying that you need to excuse it or treat it like it's not a big deal. But going after somebody's livelihood and their job and wanting them to be cast out of polite society for a mistake that they made 50 years ago, that exact mentality is the reason that if I were in Governor Ivey's shoes, I wouldn't want to bring it up either. All right, let's continue on. Representative, I don't even know how to say that name, Jundalen Given, I think is the way to say it. Quote, I don't care if it was 52 years ago or yesterday. She is the governor of the state of Alabama, which is considered one of the most racist states in the U.S. By who? By you? Who gets to decide that? Where are you drawing that from? There's no substantiation there, just throwing it out there and treating it as though it's fact. This is who she was then. It is who she is now. I have nothing for her. I don't accept her apology. She should have to stand before the people of Alabama herself. She should resign, and I don't think she should have been elected. And I think that she's a racist. Again, exactly the same mentality as Representative John Rogers. I don't want to hear her apology. I don't accept it. I just think she's a racist. And again, here, just like her colleague, not her colleague, the NAACP president, Bernard Simelton, in his statement, essentially saying, oh, before this ever happened, I thought she was a racist. I just don't like her politics and I want her out because of that. She shouldn't have been elected. Not because she got caught doing in a sketch with Blackface, just because I don't like her policies, therefore she should be gone. I don't accept her apology. I have nothing for her. I don't even want to hear. Again, that's exactly the mentality why Governor Ivey, if she did remember it, I don't know if she did or not, would have been, a little cautious about bringing this out. I will say this, though. Even though I think Given is way off base here, she does make one good point, which is Governor Ivey should not have sent her chief of staff out and done a video with no questions in response to this coming to the forefront. Governor Ivey, I know that she's a recluse. I know that politically she even avoids debates even when she's in a primary. She doesn't like being in front of the camera much. I get that. That's part of her personality. That's still no excuse. What Governor Ivey should have done is go directly to the people of the state of Alabama and field questions right after it happened. Sending out her chief of staff to make a pre-recorded message and then apologizing in a video with no questions later was not a smart move. It makes her look like she's avoiding it because she feels guilty. And heck, for all I know, she is. But either way, it does not come at it from a standpoint, you don't look like an innocent person with good intent when you do that. It gives credence to the crazies like John Rogers of the world in saying, oh, she's just sorry that she got caught. I don't believe that, and I don't see sufficient evidence for that. But granted, handling it the way that Kay Ivey did does not look good. And then that brings me to John Archibald. John Archibald wrote an opinion piece in AL.com, which granted made a few good points. But we're going to go over where he goes wrong in this particular segment, and some of it's factually accurate, but I'm going to tell you why the way that he cast it is incorrect. So here's John Archibald in AL.com. Kay Ivey's sins, these anyway, were indeed 52 years ago. It would have been 1967. It was a long time ago, and it was just 4 years after 4 little girls between Selma were killed in a church in Birmingham, 2 years after marchers were beaten on a bridge between Selma and Montgomery. The U.S. Supreme Court allegedly desecrated schools more than a decade before. It had been 4 years since Dr. Martin Luther King wrote the classic text for the civil rights movement from a Birmingham jail cell. 3 years since the Civil Rights Act, 2 years since the Voting Rights Act. Blackface had been banned from parades and events across the country in 1956 and 1964, and there was growing recognition that even then it was not funny. One of Auburn's most promising students would or should have known that then. They would or should have known that it was not a joke but a choice. All of that is accurate. So far as I can tell, I didn't find an inaccuracy in anything John Archibald said. However, what he is doing is making a very good case for why it was a bad idea for 1967 Kay Ivey to dress in blackface. I don't disagree. But you're not explaining why this is something that should come back on modern day Kay Ivey. If she has apologized, she is sincere, and she has shown absolutely no evidence whatsoever that she still holds backwards or racist views, and it hasn't affected her job performance in any way, and there's no evidence of it doing that, why should she resign? I'm all for people being held accountable, especially politicians. I've literally made a career out of it. And when somebody does something wrong, whether I like them or not, and I don't really care for Kay Ivey, to be honest, I already made that case earlier. But whether I like the person or not, I try to call balls and strikes. I try to tell it like it is. But I see absolutely nothing in John Archibald's statement or article as a whole, if you've read through the whole thing at AL.com, and I encourage you to do so. I see absolutely nothing in there that makes the case to me that this is the way Governor Kay Ivey is now, therefore we cannot allow her to have a position of power as the chief executive of the state of Alabama. That's not there. Everything in this article is why 1967 Kay Ivey shouldn't have done it, which is a conclusion that I agree with, but it speaks not at all to actions we should take today. And that's really where it goes off the rails. But here's the thing. Where were all these people? And I'm talking about Archibald and other pundits of the left, and that's what Archibald is. And all of the representatives that I just talked about, the president of the NAACP here in Alabama, Representative John Rogers, Representative Given, where were all those people when the exact same thing happened just a few months ago with another governor of another state? Ralph Northam, turns out back in college, not nearly as far back as Governor Ivey, it was far more recent, that back in college there was a picture that resurfaced of him either wearing blackface or a Klan hood. They're not sure which is which. Which, first of all, I wouldn't say that they're exactly the same thing. Blackface, like I said, should probably be avoided in every considerable situation. But the Klan hood, really? At least in Kay Iveys, it could kind of be seen as a comedy sketch or a joke. Still doesn't excuse it. But how do you write off going to a costume party dressed as either a Klansman or a person in blackface that went to the party with the Klansman to make a statement? I mean, one of these things is not like the other. And again, I'm not trying to justify what Kay Ivey did or provide political cover for her. Because frankly, like I said, I'd rather her resign. But if you're going to be fair here, why is it that all these people weren't raising Cain about another governor who also got caught wearing blackface in college? Where were these people when that surfaced about Ralph Northam? See, the difference is Northam is a Democrat, and he holds all of the correct views in their mind. Therefore, he is beyond criticism. I looked, and maybe I'm wrong. If somebody has a link or a resource that shows that these guys actually were calling for Ralph Northam's resignation, by all means, send it to me at Tactics Radio. It's right up there. By all means, send that information to me, because I don't want to get this wrong. But I don't remember Archibald or Rogers or any of them saying that, oh, Northam needs to resign. Once you wear blackface, you're just done. It becomes very clear understanding that these people don't like Kay Ivey because of her politics, and they're using the fact that she got caught in college wearing blackface as an excuse to get rid of somebody that they already wanted to get rid of. To them, it's not as though this was revealed and all of a sudden now they're like, yeah, Kay Ivey needs to resign. This is just too far beyond the pale. They decided way before they ever knew this about Kay Ivey that they wanted her gone, and then are using this as an excuse to say that she should be gone. That's all this amounts to. And it becomes blatantly obvious to anybody that remembers anything more than 5 seconds in the past. And let's also remember that a lot of these same people were ones that were supporting Hillary Clinton in the last election and probably supported Bill Clinton in the election before that, both of whom were very publicly close, lifelong friends with Robert Byrd, a senator who was an actual member of the Klan. They were so close, in fact, that Bill Clinton did his eulogy in which he tried to explain away that Robert Byrd was only a member of the Klan because he had to be to get elected. To which I responded, oh, well, that makes it better. As long as he was only doing it to hold public office, then it's totally fine to be, buddy-buddy with the Klan. And remember that a lot of these same people were singing the praises of Hillary Clinton in this last election. It's abundantly clear that racism only matters to them when it's not on their side. When they can use it as a political bludgeon against people they don't like, then all of a sudden it becomes really important and we have to handle it right now. When it's anybody that they do like, we'll just kind of ignore that one. But furthermore, I do want to say this. Not everybody was completely unreasonable. Some people were upset, but not necessarily hysterical, and were still using their intellect to make their decisions. And I would like to bring that up right now. Even though I've had my differences with him and he and I have not exactly seen eye to eye on very much politically, I got to give props to Birmingham Mayor Randall Woodfin, who said this in response. Admitting wrongdoing is the first step towards growth, but it cannot end there. Governor Ivey, I urge you to continue the healing process by reaching out to black communities you serve, hearing their needs, and making transformative investments in opportunities for black residents who have been disproportionately and systematically disenfranchised. All right, so I'm pretty sure what he's talking about here is supporting things like welfare programs and, basically using this as an excuse to try to get the governor to do his political bidding. That I don't agree with. However, I do think he's making a powerful point here. He says at the beginning that admitting wrongdoing is the first step to growth. And basically offering an olive branch and saying, look, Governor Ivey, I don't want you to resign. I want you to do what's right for your state. Now, it seems based on the last part of that statement, what he thinks is right for the state and what I think is right for the state are not necessarily lined up. But I have to hand it to him. At least he is trying. At least he is reaching out. It doesn't seem malicious. It seems as though he is actually trying to make headway and build some bridges, which I admire. And then there's Senator Vivian Davis Figures, who said this. She's a Democrat from Mobile. So Senator Figures said, I was very saddened to hear that Governor Ivey had participated in a blackface skit in college. I didn't know her then, but I have had the opportunity to serve with her as the presiding officer over the Senate as lieutenant governor and as governor over the last 10 years. While she and I have disagreed on many issues over the years, I would have to say that she has never led me to believe that she is a racist. If the state can forgive a man like George C. Wallace and reelect him governor after all of the racist things he did as governor, I would hope that we can forgive this woman who participated in a blackface skit when she was in college over 50 years ago. I accepted her apology and look forward to working with her to move Alabama forward. Well done, Senator Figures. You didn't try to make Kay Ivey out to be a monster. You didn't try to use her for your own political game. You didn't try to hedge your way in and say, I wish that she would support these policies and that would prove that she's really not a racist. She did what any normal, decent human being would do, which is say, well, obviously what she did in the past was wrong and bad and it upset me, which it upset me too, even though I'm not black. It would upset any decent person to learn that the governor of a state once participated in a blackface sketch. I think that that's perfectly normal and natural. And especially as somebody whom the sketch was apparently mocking, totally understandable from your perspective. But saying, but that's not who Governor Ivey is now. And I accept her apology since she seems sincere. I want to believe her. I want to give her the benefit of the doubt. She's given me no reason to believe that that's still the person that she is, and I know better than that. Therefore, even though it bothers me that she did this at one time in her life, I'm willing to extend a hand and move forward from this. That's the attitude a Christian should adopt. That's the attitude of forgiveness that we could all use a little bit more of. Governor Ivey actually apologized again today and said this. I didn't remember being at the Baptist Student Union for any kind of skit like that for sure, but I've apologized for it. I should not have done that, and I know it's important to apologize to the people of Alabama. And then when asked about whether or not she would be resigning, she said, heavens no, I'm not going to resign. That was something that happened 52 years ago, and I'm not that person. And my administration stands on being inclusive and helping people. So she's just kind of reflecting what Senator Figures was saying. I was that person. It was absolutely wrong for me to do that then. I'm not that person now. And because of that, she asked for an apology and asked for the opportunity to move forward. I think that that's perfectly rational and reasonable. The main thing is we have to get away from this idea that one wrong move, one stupid mistake defines you for the rest of your life. Now, if we're talking about criminal activity, of course that does carry some punishment, but if we're talking about just offending people, I understand some of the reaction to it. I understand Senator Figure's reaction to it, being upset with somebody. Totally understand that. But we've got to get away from this mentality that once you've made a mistake, you're tainted for life. There's nothing you can do to redeem yourself. You must be cast out as a pariah from polite society and never be allowed to enter back in. Even if for the past half century, we've seen no indication that you are still that person. I don't want to excuse Kay Ivey. I don't want to excuse anybody that does something like this. But you have to understand there is a difference in excusing and forgiving. Excusing means overlooking, that you don't consider it anymore, that you're just like, it's okay. It's not a big deal. No. Forgiveness is acknowledging that a trespass has taken place, understanding the magnitude of it, and then when somebody asks for forgiveness and then repents, you say, okay, I'm going to treat it as though it didn't happen because I forgive you. I acknowledge that it happened, but you're clearly making an effort to move past it. Therefore, I'm not going to hold it against you any longer. You see the difference? That's the difference that we are offered as Christians every single day. That with our past mistakes and our sins, God doesn't excuse them. He doesn't ignore them. He doesn't say that they never happened. He forgives and gives us a path to repent, which means to change our behavior and move forward in a relationship with Him. Let's go to the daily dose of stupid.
No, you messed it up. You're stupid.
And today's daily dose of stupid, it does come to you via, we're actually going to have a three-way Mexican standoff for today's daily dose of stupid, because I think that there's varying degrees of stupid in this story, but the point is they're stupid all the way around. And I just wanted to address it. It is actually something that deals heavily with the state of Alabama and not necessarily with the national scene. So here's what happened. The Alabama GOP, they passed a resolution to kick Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar out of Congress. And we'll get into some of the details here. But what you need to take away from this is one of the stupidest things that I have ever seen. Not because I like Ilhan Omar or Rashida Tlaib. I think that they are arguably, and I think that it's probably not even close, by far the worst representatives in the House. And that's saying something, especially with some of the other colorful characters we have in the House of Representatives. I still think that they're probably the worst. So I'm not saying this as some way to try to make a pass for them. But it's very clear that what's going on here is that the ALGOP is merely doing something to whip up its base. That's all that's happening. Because they know that this resolution is not going to be taken seriously. They know that the House is not going to actually vote to kick them out of Congress. That's not going to happen. And if it did, it wouldn't pass. Keep in mind, it's controlled by the Democrats. We couldn't even get to a majority to kick them out, much less 2/3. They knew that this wasn't going anywhere. They did it to stir and whip up the base. And I want Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar personally to never leave Congress. If you gave me the option, I would say yes, term limits, with the exception of Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar. And the reason I specifically want them in Congress for as long as humanly possible is because they have done more to bring people and bring votes to the GOP side than any Republican or conservative ever has. And I'm not even just talking about myself. I'm talking about heavy hitters like Glenn Beck, Sean Hannity, Mark Levin, Rush Limbaugh. You know, a lot of the guys, minus Glenn Beck because he's not, but a lot of the guys that are really prominent on News Radio 1440. These two have done way more to rally to the conservative cause than they ever had. And that's not because I don't respect them, as you well know. It's because people have vastly underestimated the value of having people that are foul-mouthed and despise this country and also hate Jews and hate Israel being the poster children and very vocal in the Democrat movement. All the Democrats have to do to absolutely destroy Trump in this next election is don't be crazy. That's it. If they wanted to make a call to normalcy, if they wanted to go with someone who is an actual moderate, I think that Joe Biden's the only one that even has a chance of kind of making that case. If they wanted to take back the White House, make bigger gains in the House, and maybe even take the Senate, all they would have to do is shut up and not be crazy. Just seem to be the adults in the room and they'd be fine. But they're not going to be able to do that, especially with Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib, who basically react like toddlers to everything that happens to them. And the only thing they know how to do is talk about how victimized they are. And it drives the average American, people both on the right and also people in the middle, absolutely nuts. And as long as Donald Trump, and even Trump has picked up on this, that's the reason that he's trying to make them the face of the Democrat Party, because he and his political advisors understand all we have to do is contrast ourselves to those nut jobs and we'll look like geniuses. And they will. All they have to do is make the case that voting for a Democrat is the same as voting for Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib and or Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And then that other member of the squad that nobody can ever remember her name. If all we have to do is convince people that voting for them is the same as voting for these three nut jobs and their buddy, and we're home free. And they're exactly right. There's a reason that they have abysmally low approval ratings. They talk about Trump's bad approval ratings, and granted, it's bad. It's not good. Ilhan Omar and AOC are in the crapper. Their approval ratings are so bad. By the way, in polls that surveyed specifically likely Democrat voters, they were polling under 30 amongst Democrats. That's how unliked they are by the average American. So no, ALGOP, this was one of the dumbest things you've ever done. I want them to stay in Congress as long as humanly possible. Let them stay, and believe me, they're going to help the conservative cause the longer they are in Congress. But Ilhan Omar actually responded to this in a tweet, and this is what she said. Sorry, ALGOP. This is a representative democracy. I was elected with 78% of the vote by the people of Minnesota's 5th District, not the Alabama Republican Party. If you want to clean up politics, maybe you shouldn't nominate an accused child molester as your Senate candidate. All right, so a few things. First of all, Alabama and the United States of America are not representative democracies. They are constitutional republics. We are not a representative democracy. We never have been a democracy. If you don't believe me, read Federalist 10. James Madison will lay all of that out much better than I ever could. Second, Roy Moore was not an accused child molester when he was nominated. He was when he faced Doug Jones in the general election, but when he was nominated as the Republican candidate, that wasn't even out there. There were people that thought he was kooky and weird, but there was nobody that believed that he was a child molester. That primary took place in June, and then the runoff took place just a few weeks later between him and Luther Strange. It was not until several months after that, just a couple months before the general election, I think it was only a month actually, if I'm not mistaken, it was about 5, maybe 6 weeks, that the Washington Post broke that story that accused Roy Moore of being a child molester. So it wasn't until long after he secured that nomination and was already the duly elected Republican representative in that race that he was accused of child molestation. And another thing on that, accused is not the same as convicted. This is another mistake that people have made all the time when talking about Roy Moore, and eventually I wound up not voting for Roy Moore in the general. It had nothing to do with the accusations levied against him. It had a lot to do with him cozying up to members of the alt-right like Stephen Bannon. But when it comes to Roy Moore, a favorite talking point is to try to use Roy Moore and say, see, Republicans are so desperate they don't even care if they elect a child molester. That's not true. And the vast majority of people that did vote for him did so not believing that he actually was a child molester. So there's a difference in accused and proven. It was basically his word against hers. And I, to this day, haven't seen any compelling evidence that he was a child molester. I've seen compelling evidence that he was a little creepy and that he liked women significantly younger than him. But I don't see any indication that he actually acted upon it, pursued them, or did anything that they were uncomfortable with doing. And with the exception of one, every girl that was included in that WAPO story was of the age of consent anyway. But nonetheless, Ilhan Omar just completely ignores all of that just to make her little point. But I do think that it's hilarious that when Ilhan Omar is attacked, she responds by posting a factually inaccurate tweet with multiple inconsistencies and incorrect statements included in it, and brags about her poll numbers. Has Ilhan Omar been hanging out with Trump a little too much? Because this is totally a Trump move. Instead of responding, in a video clip or something, you respond on Twitter, and then you talk about how great your poll numbers are, and you get pretty much all of your facts wrong. It's like, did she take a page right out of Trump's playbook? Because that's kind of what it sounded like to me. But anyway, and here's the third part of this Mexican standoff we've got going on here. This one comes from the only person that actually probably does have a revolver in this story, since I'm going to use my Western motif, Roy Moore. So Roy Moore responds, "It's a shame that we've got people in Congress that don't even support American values and support Muslim ideology, which is directly contrary to the United States Constitution." Okay, so far so good. I don't see anything in that statement I disagree with. If they take an oath on the Quran, they take an oath on an instrument that violates religious freedom. They don't recognize the God who gave religious freedom under our Constitution, and I think that's a very big criticism of what they're doing in Congress. They don't care for religious liberty because their government just violates it. Bold, but still technically correct. Now, you're venturing off into waters that are going to be dangerous, and you're going to run into at least the possibility of running into a rock, but so far what Roy Moore is saying, I actually agree with. He's right that when they worship Allah, they are worshiping a God that commands people to submit. Heck, the word Islam means submission. And I'm not talking about submission in the sense that you turn your will over to God. In Islam, you turn your will over to Allah, whether you want to or not. And if you don't, his followers force you to do so. There's a reason that they have taxes on people that are on other religions, that you don't have full rights unless you are a Muslim in a Muslim country. I mean, I could go on and on about this, but that's a little bit beyond the scope of our study today. But suffice it to say that when you're talking about religious liberty, look at Christian nations versus Muslim nations, and there's a world of difference there. And there's also a world of difference in what the Bible teaches about religious liberty and what the Quran teaches about how their members and their adherents are supposed to administer that to others. The Bible has no such commands. And so there is a world of difference in both the reading of the text and the application thereof. So even though Roy Moore is venturing off into dangerous water, technically everything he said to this point, still correct. Here's where he goes off the rails a little bit. So I would say if they take an oath to the Quran, no, they should not serve in Congress. There's two ways to take this. The first way, if you give Roy Moore a massive portion of benefit of the doubt, you can reach the conclusion, what he meant there was that when it comes to serving in Congress, only Christians should serve, as opposed to should be allowed to serve. You see the difference there? Because if it's the first option, he's actually reflecting the sentiments of John Adams. John Adams specifically said, it's both recorded in his prayer mantle where he says that only godly men would serve in the office of the White House. He also said that it is the duty of Christians to prefer Christian leaders over all others. It was the stance of John Adams that if you get your option between a Christian and a non-Christian, you go with a Christian every time when you're talking about who you're going to vote for. And so I don't think that it's obscene or radical to suggest that when you're talking about somebody that's going to protect religious liberty, you should at least give your default. You should at least think, okay, the guy that is a Christian is probably going to be more likely to be trusted in that area than other religions that teach something completely different. The only problem is, in the context of what we're talking about, ousting two members out of the House of Representatives that happen to be Muslim, saying that they shouldn't serve, saying that them swearing on a Quran is a problem. That's where you're getting into murky territory, where you're suggesting that there should essentially be a religious litmus test, and that anybody that is not a Christian should not be allowed to serve in Congress, which, by the way, would be a blatant violation of Article 6, Paragraph 3 of the United States Constitution, which states specifically that you cannot administer a religious test for an oath of office, which is a good policy. I may not agree with people of other religions sometimes taking office, but if that's what the people in their district want to do, that's up to them. It's not up to me. And it certainly shouldn't be up to the government to decide that. And so it would not be unreasonable for somebody to read this exact same statement and say, well, Roy Moore is not an advocate of religious liberty. He basically just said that anybody that is not of the same faith as him should not be able to serve in office. If you're reading strictly what he is saying, I think that you could take it the way that John Adams meant it. But I think that it would be far easier, especially because of the place where this took place. The overall conversation in which Roy Moore uttered these words, it would be very easy to interpret it as saying, oh, Judge Moore doesn't believe that anybody that's not a Christian should even be allowed in Congress. And based on previous things that Roy Moore has said, I think that that also paints this in a very negative light. And so this is the issue that you're running into. Why would they all do this? This is one of those stories that you've got a three-way standoff and all three sides are neck deep in stupid. With Roy Moore's, it wasn't exactly technically wrong, but it's politically unwise to phrase it that way. You've got to be a lot more careful and a lot more precise in your language. In Ilhan Omar's case, granted, stupid is a second language to her, probably better, easier for her to understand than English sometimes based on some of her speaking engagements. But stupid is a second language to her, so it surprises nobody, but she gets all of her facts wrong and doesn't respond well, and then sort of takes on the mantle of Trump, oddly enough. And then there's the ALGOP, who wants to oust the two members of Congress that are helping the Republicans most to win this next election. And if you are a political device like the GOP, you would think that they would be doing everything they can to help Republicans get elected. So this is just one of those stories where they're stupid on all sides. And in this case, it happens to be a triangle of stupid. Let's go to the chaplain's report.
In 1775, the Continental Congress created the Chaplain Corps. Under the command of General George Washington, each soldier was required to attend worship service every Sunday. While other armies advanced on their feet, Washington's troops advanced on their knees. It's time for the Chaplain's Report with Caleb Colquitt on tactics.
And our chaplain's report today does come from the book of Proverbs. And when you're looking at any of the wisdom literature in the Bible, it's kind of a short one-off kind of thing, especially in Proverbs, less so because we're a little bit later in the book. In the earlier books, you basically had one wise saying in a verse, and the next verse had nothing to do with the previous one. By the time you get to the later chapters of Proverbs, they're still Proverbs, and they're still written in poetic verse, but they're lengthened a little bit. And I like that because you get a little bit more time to think about it and really absorb what the text is saying. And these wisdom books just have so much contained within them that helps us in our daily lives. There's so much practical application in each of them, and I think that this is a good case, uh, regardless of what side you are on in this discussion. So let's look at Proverbs 26, 3 through 5. A whip is for the horse, a bridle for the donkey, and a rod for the back of fools. Do not answer a fool according to his folly, or you will also be like him. Answer a fool as his folly deserves, that he be not wise in his own eyes. So what is this verse saying? It's saying a couple things. First of all, it's acknowledging that there are people that act foolishly and are in need of correction. Just like a donkey needs a bridle and a horse needs a whip, sometimes human beings don't act very intelligently. And because of that, we're in need of correction. Now, the example it's giving there is corporal punishment. But as a general rule, punishment is not something that is to be seen as a negative, at least not in the context and we're reading it right here. It's done with the intention of correction, of setting a person on the correct path. Because you don't whip a horse because you want to torture it. You whip a horse because it is acting incorrectly. You put a bridle on a donkey not because you hate the donkey or want it to be uncomfortable, but because the donkey needs some guidance. And that's the important thing that I think that we should all remember. That even if we happen to be on the right, and even if we happen to be wiser than the person that we are discussing, even if we're trying to prove that somebody is incorrect, it should always be done in the same manner in which Proverbs is talking about it right here. That we do so in the spirit of love and the spirit of correction. We're not trying to win an argument or just to steer them in the direction that we want them to go. We genuinely want them to do what is best for them, what is in their best interest. And I think having that attitude changes our approach in a lot of ways. We're not doing it to troll people. We're not doing it to say, just to puff our chest out and say how much smarter we are than they are. We're doing it in a humble way, and we're doing it because we're saying, hey, this thing that you're engaged in, it's not right. And because it's not right, and because it's self-destructive, and because it is not good for you, I'm going to give you some information here. I'm going to give you some direction here to help you improve your own life. That changes how you think about the situation. And there's another thing that I'd like to point out here too, that when the Bible correctly asserts here that when you are going to answer somebody who is foolish, you have to change your direction in the way that you answer as well. It's saying don't fall into the same habits as him. If you're in an argument or a disagreement with a foolish person, don't stoop to their level. Don't give an answer the way that they expect. Answer them in a way that's going to fit where they are. I think a great example of this is the parables of Christ, or the stories where he actually interacted with people. You see, he talked to people on their level. Sometimes he ran up against foolish people, and he had to change his approach. Some people, like the Pharisees, he called a generation of vipers. That's pretty bold. And he did so because they were acting foolishly and should have known better. You'll notice when he's talking to Levi or Zacchaeus or other harlots or tax collectors, takes a very different stance. Why? Because he gave them the information on their level in a way that they would understand it and they could accept it. He had to be a little harsher with the people that should have known better, because that was the only way he was going to get some of them responding. We always talk about Pharisees as though they all went the wrong way, as though they were a collective group that they all hated Jesus. That's not true. Paul was a Pharisee. Nicodemus was a Pharisee. There were other Pharisees that are mentioned in the Bible, not by name, but as people that supported Christ. Not everybody missed it. A lot of them did. Most of them did. Enough to get Jesus crucified, but not everyone did. And so it's important for us to remember that our approach needs to have that ultimate goal of helping people, and doing so because we care about them and we care about the direction that they're taking. And I think that the reason that the Bible is giving us this, and the reason that it ends right there with, so answer a fool his folly deserves, that he not be wise in his own eyes. We've all been guilty of this. We have all done things where we acted foolishly and we believed that we were doing the right thing. That's a human trait. I've done it more times than I can count. You have too. And normally, the way that we realize that we weren't doing something right, sometimes we come to that revelation on our own, but usually someone had to help us. Sometimes it was somebody just lovingly taking us aside and gently saying, hey, that was not a smart move. Sometimes it takes some tough love. But either way, somebody had to inform us that we were incorrect. And that allowed us to start the journey of correcting ourselves and starting on the right path again. For that same reason, the Bible is saying that you don't just ignore a foolish person. You don't just let them waller in their own foolishness, nor do you answer them in a way that a fool would not understand. You don't just belittle them or talk down to them. You guide them. You help them up, because all of us have been the fool at some point. And hopefully, we learn from that experience in a way that we're going to be able to help another person so that they will not be wise in their own eyes and be blind to their own mistakes. You see, the core of this passage is not to shout down foolish people, but to realize that a lot of the times we're the fools ourselves, and we're the ones that have to help each other if we're going to rise to the level of wisdom that the proverb author is asserting that we need to reach to, the kind of wisdom that God will be proud of in his children. Stay the course, friends.
Tactics is a production of News Radio 1440 and Cumulus Media Montgomery. Any opinions expressed on this program are those of the host and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of Cumulus Media. The theme song for Tactics is 6 Foot Town by Big and Rich. Graphics by Jessica Dawson. Broadcast studios provided by Cumulus Media Montgomery. Location studios provided by the Dalraida Church of Christ. Copyright 2019.